I didn't mention at the end of the last video, but Buster actually also found our TikiWiki, so it wouldn't have found the particular vulnerability. We would have needed vulnerability scanner or manual analysis and research to find that, but it would find the TikiWiki directory. So speaking of manual analysis, that's always a good one as well. Sometimes there's just no tool in the world that's going to figure it out, so we might have to look at things manually. We did see that we had Zervit 0.4 based on what came out of the version scan on port 3232 on Windows XP. However, we also know that it's really fragile. It fell down even with the version scan. In a pen test, we may never see it again after that. Of course, we know how to turn it back on. Let's see if we can find anything about that Zervit 0.4. Looks like I've got a couple things here. I've got the source code at SourceForge. Well, maybe the source code. It may just be an executable. Let's see. Now I'm curious. That's a zip file. Says it's executable. I don't know. Thought maybe it had the source. We could go into some source code review. A little ahead of ourselves, but you know. If the source code is available and you have the time, why not? It looks like we've got directory traversals. Also looks like some memory corruption, a buffer overflow. Since we know it's really fragile, I would generally steer clear of the buffer overflows or anything memory corruption, since we already know it's liable to fall down if we make a mistake. Directory traversal, on the other hand, might be an okay thing to work with. We'll be using the web server as intended. We'll just be moving around a bit. So what directory traversal allows us to do is move out of our web server directory, so access other parts of the file system. So in the example here, they're grabbing boot.ini. So we could see if that works for us. If we do a netcat, let's not do it. We could do it with netcat certainly, but let's do it like this. So we want 192.168.1.76. Port is 3232, and we want, says, index.html question mark. Let's just do index.html. Oh, it says it's not listening. Fell down randomly. Awesome. Didn't even talk to it yet. Let's see what index.html says. It says there is no index.html. Oh, cool. Directory listening. So it actually has directory listening turned on, so we can see what all is on George's desktop. Can we move out of it? Can we go up? No, it doesn't want to let us go up. It's not going to let us move to different directories, but we can see what's on the desktop. Cool. Because that's where all the stuff I installed is, like Muna.py and Immunity Debugger are for exploit development, and XAMPP, and all sorts of stuff lying around. Cool. But according to this, if we do a question mark after index.html and do dot is going to move back to the next directory. This has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that gets us to boot.ini. So that's going to be on Windows XP systems. That just basically has boot settings. It's not really all that interesting from a pen test perspective, but it does prove that we're able to access other files. So in exploitation, we can hopefully find something a little more interesting. But we can at least just see if it works. Index.html question mark. And how many was it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Boot.ini. We save file. Boot.ini. saved it to the desktop. So please cd the desktop, cat boot.ini. Sure enough. So the only thing that may happen here is based on where Zervit is installed. We just happened to get lucky here that 5 was correct. It might be in its own folder or somewhere else besides the desktop. So you may have to try different ... numbers. I wouldn't give up just because it didn't happen the right time. I might try 6 or 7 sets of ... before I gave up. So that's another thing we can potentially exploit. If we can find some interesting files on here that we can access. We may not be able to access system files. It is started by the user Georgia, which we wouldn't know that, but whoever started the web server we're going to have their access. So unless it was started by system, we won't have access to all files, but we may be able to find something sensitive nonetheless. So one last thing I want to do is I want to netcat to our Windows XP on port 25. Remember that verify verb was enabled when we looked at our nmap scripting engine. It said that verify, VRFY, is enabled. So if we do VRFY on Georgia, it says Georgia does exist. If we ask for James, user not local. So while this again isn't going to give us access to the system, it does allow us to find valid usernames that we might be able to use to log in. If you have just installed your POP3 server, or your SLMail, you'll see that that SLMail has POP3 enabled, so you could try and guess Georgia's password, which you can probably guess what it is. Through POP3 if you wanted to, but again, that is going to go down after 15 days. So it's the wild goose chase vulnerability otherwise. But we'll have other options for being able to guess passwords. But if that POP3 system or service is still up, you can try that as well. That's all we're going to do for vulnerability analysis. I do encourage you to spend time with the different tools. Maybe try some other vulnerability scanners if you can get a free trial or a home edition, nmap scripting engine and such, Dirbuster, things like that. I encourage you to become familiar with them.